If you love icy boardrooms, slow-burning tension, and forbidden attachments that refuse to stay polite, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Comment Team CEO or Team Partner if you already picked a side. Now breathe. This is my story. I thought the assignment would be ordinary. A tight 800-word profile for the Weekend magazine. A portrait of capitalism with a human face. I pictured glass towers, a well-rehearsed smile. A man who knew how to give sound bites and keep the rest of himself behind a velvet rope. I did not expect the corridors to feel like a theater of power, or for my pulse to learn a new rhythm when that velvet rope was lifted. The brief was simple. Interview Alasdair Voss, founder and CEO of Voss Capital, a name that swallows headlines and leaves a clean, sharp silence. He had made his fortune in logistics, then pivoted into real estate and tech, and now the city tracked his moves like weather. The editor had written, "Get him human. Make him approachable. Be warm but incisive." She had underlined the word human in red. I practiced humanness in the metro between stops, folding it like a napkin. I rehearse questions until they feel like friends I already know. I wore a navy dress that made me feel competent and a pair of sensible flats. My notebook felt small and heavy in my hands, a pocket of expectations. Voss Capital's lobby swallowed me in marble, and the scent of citrus soap. Security greeted me with the expression of people who had little patience for small talk. An assistant escorted me to a glass elevator that rose through light like an elevator to instruction. I rode up and rehearsed my voice until it sounded like my own. Alasdair Voss met me in an office that looked like a curated map of a very deliberate life. Commissioned photographs of acquisitions in black frames. A bookshelf arranged with the cold precision of a man who measured an idea's worth by how it fit between other ideas. He was, in person, all the things the articles said. Tall, wire-framed glasses, hair more salt than pepper at the temples. His face was a plane of discipline. His smile could be a ledger entry. Efficient, polite, unromantic. He offered coffee. He asked where I was from, what I liked to read. He answered with minimal anecdotes about a childhood in a small town and a scholarship that had been his ticket out. He was careful with self-revelation, the way men who build empires learn to be. We spoke for nearly an hour. I asked him about philanthropy, about how he chose the causes he supported. He spoke about infrastructure and dignity and the idea that cities craved care disguised as development. He spoke like someone who loved the architecture of systems more than the messy living people inside them. I wrote down his phrases, the ones that made good pull quotes. And then, as our conversation untied itself from the formal, the doors opened and a man entered who seemed to shadow Alasdair like a second son. Julian Reed. His name on the visitor plaque later would be short. Julian Reed, Chief Operating Officer. He was introduced as the man who made sure Alasdair's ideas ran on time. Julian was not like his boss. If Alasdair was cold calculation in a tuxedo, Julian was a winter that kept the city honest. Blonde hair cropped close. Hands that had the steady assurance of someone who built things with other people's trust at stake. His jaw was the kind that cleared the room by measure. He moved with an economy of motion, no superfluous charm, no measured smiles, just sharpness and competence. The assistant called him the partner, and the word fit. Julian was the muscle to Alasdair's mind. He looked at me once, only once, and something in that look carved a neat line across my skin. It was not curious, it was cataloging. Like a man noting which tools could be useful to keep. "Miss Hart," he said, cold and precise. "I'm Julian. I'll be staying for this interview." Alasdair blinked, a small confusion flickering. "You'll stay." Julian's voice was low and factual. "I want to be present." I tried to keep my pen from shaking. It wasn't the part of him that worried me so much as the way he stood near the window as if he belonged to the light itself. He took a seat opposite us and opened his hands like a judge. The interview continued, but it was no longer simply a meeting with a CEO. It became a subtly staged exchange, a triangle of competence and intent. Alasdair talked and Julian observed. When Alasdair laughed, Julian's mouth remained neutral. When I asked a probing question about ethical sourcing, Julian's jaw tightened for a heartbeat, and then relaxed like a spring. The room had the temperature of someone who measured consequences and did not like surprises. After the interview, Alasdair offered to show me the rooftop garden Voss Capital maintained for community events. He seemed genuinely proud of the project. I followed, thinking that would be the end of my access. A photo, a handshake, a thank you. Julian trailed behind like a shadow with a purpose. On the rooftop, the city spread out with indifferent splendor. Plants in raised beds bent in wind and sunlight. Alistair spoke earnestly about soil and seedlings as if speaking of something dangerous and needed. He asked me about my next piece, about what my editor wanted. I answered the way reporters do, honest enough, vague enough. Julian stood near the rail and watched. When a gust of wind lifted a page from my notebook and threatened to send it over the edge, Alistair reached out casually, but Julian's hand moved faster. He caught the page and brought it to me with a motion so fluid it seemed choreographed. "Careful," he said, handing me the paper. His voice was an intervention, barely a murmur. "You're wasting good words to the wind." I took the page and felt, for a second, the absurd vulnerability of an ordinary person whose ordinary things are protected by men who are anything but ordinary. That evening over email my editor wrote, "Nice piece. Send final by Thursday. Also, keep an eye on the dynamic. If there's a story in their partnership, find it." The assignment shifted. The human angle could include the machine that keeps the human in place. My curiosity, once a small thing, turned hot. I accepted a follow-up meeting. Alistair agreed. Julian asked to attend again. Between interviews, the city thinned into nights of thinking, of drafts and headlines, but it kept returning like a tide of questions. I kept seeing Julian's hand, the way it closed and opened, how it moved like a promise of consequence. Sometimes I would catch myself shaping a question to see if he would react, to see if the line of his jaw would lie. On a Tuesday, Alistair invited me to an off-grid dinner at his private club, a place that smelled of old wood and relevant decisions. The guest list was small. Donors, strategists, a few journalists. Julian arrived before me and sat in the corner like a watchtower. He did not smile when I entered, but his eyes landed on me and did not leave. The dinner moved like a text message, polite, opulent, with conversations that kept to the margins of commerce. I asked Alistair a question about transparency and development, about eviction and the rhetoric of benevolence. He answered with statistics, with charts and careful language. Julian interrupted once, softly and clearly. "Transparency isn't just numbers," he said. "It's the people you decide to keep close when no one is looking." Everyone turned. My pen paused. That line was not an answer. It was a measuring stick. After the dinner, Julian walked me out to the curb. The city night buzzed like an insect. He talked about the ways he kept things safe for Alistair and for the company. He spoke with a clarity that left no room for romantic misinterpretation. But there was something in his tone that felt territorial. "You're intrigued," he said, as if stating a fact. "You ask questions that prod at ruptures." "I do my job." My voice was steadier than I felt. "And sometimes the ruptures are the story." He looked at me then, and for the first time I saw no partner or guardian, only a man making a calculation. "Be careful," he said. "You poke at power long enough and you will get poked back." It sounded less like advice and more like a warning. I wanted to be indignant. Instead, I remembered the gust on the rooftop, the way he had saved a page from falling. I remembered the small convenience of being noticed by men who could tidy the edges of your life. Over the next weeks, my articles ran with care, quotes shaped into readable warmth. Readers liked the human Alistair. My editor liked the clicks. But the comment thread loved Julian in a way metrics could not measure. The cold one who keeps him honest. People loved the scaffolding of a genius. Julian began to send me messages, short professional notes at first, offering background on logistics and data. He suggested documents to review, names to check. He began to send invites. A tour of a site, a breakfast meeting. I accepted because the line between interest and access is how my work breathes. At breakfast one morning in a small cafe near a project site, Julian did not talk about logistics. He asked me about my life in the way a man asks when he is cataloging ballast. "What's important to you?" he asked, spoon idle. "Truth," I said. "And not getting used." He considered the reply like a man rolling a stone in his mouth. "People get used because they allow themselves to be useful," he said. "Don't confuse kindness for weakness." I didn't answer. I was learning the grammar Julian used. A language of protection that read like possession. A week later, the story broke. A whistleblower alleged one of Voss Capital's subsidiaries had misreported tenant relocations. The city smelled of scandal and the newsroom buzzed like a hive. My editor wanted more context. Alastair offered a sit down. Julian insisted on joining. At the press conference, Alastair spoke with his usual controlled sorrow. His answers were measured. Julian stood at his side as always, eyes like a dam. When the microphones peeled away, a reporter shoved a microphone at me and asked what I thought. I opened my mouth and tried to be what I always was. Careful, truthful, composed. After the cameras, when people dispersed, Julian approached. "You handled that well," he said. "Why are you always there?" I asked, honestly tired. "Why do you insist on being at my interviews, at my meetings?" He paused, and beneath his composed surface something flickered. Affection or calculation, I couldn't tell. "Because some stories," he said quietly, "are dangerous to let be told wrong. I didn't want to be objectified as danger, as liability." "I can handle the facts," I said. "I can handle the complexity." He studied me like one studies a plan. "Maybe," he said softer. "But complexity breaks people. I prefer to keep the pieces intact." Pieces. People. The word settled heavy. And then the moment came that shifted everything. On a rainy afternoon, Julian intercepted me outside the building as I left for an unrelated meeting. He stepped into my path and simply said without preface, "Don't go to the East Side project tomorrow." I began because my brain registered instructions as a violation of the job. "I have an assignment there." "Cancel it," he insisted. "You don't understand who will be there." I felt the old stubbornness rise. "I have a job," I said. "My readers deserve the truth." He looked at me for a long pull of air. Then he reached up, just enough to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. A movement so small and intimate it felt like sacrilege coming from him. "You will think I am overstepping," he said. "But I am not doing this for myself." "For who then?" I asked, startled. "For you." The word landed like a stone and rolled in my chest. Protection mutates fast into ownership when spoken by a man who moves cities with a schedule. I should have walked away. Instead, I let the smallest breath between us lengthen. The next morning I missed a story. The office chewed me out and praised me in the same meeting. "You're safe. But we need the peace still." I thought of Julian's steady insistence and of Alastair's careful architecture. I thought of the way safety can be an exchange. Later that week, Alastair called me in for a private conversation. He asked about my experience with the city and elsewhere. He asked why I wrote what I hoped for. He said with gentle gravity, "We want to support the truth." I left his office feeling both warmed and unsettled. Julian waited outside the elevator and slipped an envelope into my hand. No note, only a check with a number that would fix the next 5 months of my life. The gift felt like a question. "Take it," he said. "Not as charity, as protection." I folded the envelope into my bag like an unlabeled thing and walked home with my fingers shaking. That night I sat with my own reflection and the ledger of ethics. I had been taught to write without influence. I had also been taught that food had to be bought and rent paid and bills balanced. Julian's generosity had the shape of leverage. Alastair's charm had the shape of possibility. When the whistleblower's allegations were proven partially true by internal memos, the public demanded accountability. Voss Capital issued a statement and promised reforms. My column ran, and in the credits I thanked sources and documents that had changed my perspective. After it published, Julian sent a single text. "Well done. Stay careful." There was a tenderness in the words and a guard in the syntax. I had fallen into a dangerous habit, interpreting stewardship as affection. Weeks later, at a charity gala where the city's movers and shakers toasted fixes and futures, Julian found me again near the terrace. "You can leave the ledger to the lawyers," he said. "But don't forget who handed you the pen when it mattered." I looked at him, at the clean line of his face, and finally decided to ask the question that had been clawing for air. "Why do you care?" He did not answer immediately. He looked at the skyline like someone remembering a map. Then he stepped closer, so near I could see the micro-rhythm of his breath. "Because someone has to keep the world from teaching you to trust the wrong things," he said. "Because I prefer the ones I look after to stay whole. And because you—" He stopped, a fracture of something almost personal. "You write truth beautifully." I can't afford for that to be injured.